The night was heavy, the kind of black that swallowed sound. Moisture hung in the air, clinging to every surface, muffling every breath. Staff Sergeant Cole Harlow lay prone on a ridge overlooking the valley below, his rifle steady against his shoulder. The jungle beneath him was dense and restless, filled with the murmurs of insects and the distant cry of something unseen. He had been watching for hours, motionless except for the slow, deliberate movement of his eyes behind the scope. The world beyond the lens was calm, too calm, and that quiet scraped against his instincts like sandpaper. He adjusted his position by inches, the ghillie suit blending him seamlessly into the wet earth. Sweat trickled down his neck, cold against skin that had long ago stopped feeling comfort. He'd been out here for 2 days, part of an observation mission sent to monitor unidentified atmospheric activity. Headquarters had dismissed it as debris or sensor malfunctions, but Harlow had been in the field long enough to know that dismissing the unknown was a rookie's mistake. The signs were there, the static interference, the dead satellites, the silences on encrypted channels. Something was coming. He could feel it. He glanced at the small display attached to his wrist. The satellite feed was down again. He wasn't surprised. He'd stopped relying on technology hours ago. The jungle had a way of eating machines and men alike. What he trusted was the rhythm of the earth, the pulse of sound that told him when something was wrong. And right now, that rhythm was broken. A flicker in the sky caught his eye. He lifted the scope higher, tracking it. For a moment, it was nothing, just another star winking through the haze. Then it moved, too fast, slicing through the atmosphere like a blade. Another followed, and another, until the stars themselves seemed to be falling. The comm unit at his chest crackled to life. Specter 1, this is Watchtower. We've got multiple entries breaching upper atmosphere. Confirm visual? Confirmed, Harlow said quietly. His voice was calm, but his hand had tightened around the rifle. They're not meteors. Copy that, Specter. Maintain position and report any ground impact. Reinforcements are inbound. Understood. He released the comm switch and exhaled through his nose. The sky was burning now. Dozens of objects streaked downward, glowing white-hot before vanishing behind the tree line. A few seconds later, the earth trembled. The shock waves rolled through the ground, vibrating through his chest. He tracked the impacts by sound. Northwest, then south, then closer. Too close. Harlow rolled onto his side, scanning through his scope. The forest canopy rippled with light. Branches snapped. Smoke rose in thin columns. He could hear something else too. Mechanical, rhythmic. Footsteps. He pressed himself flat against the dirt, slowing his breathing until his pulse matched the tempo of the rain. Through the scope, he saw movement, tall shapes, fluid and deliberate, moving through the trees. They weren't human. Their bodies shimmered faintly, refracting the ambient light like heat haze. He focused on one and felt his stomach tighten. Its armor wasn't metal. It was alive, pulsing softly, bioluminescent veins coursing beneath translucent plating. He had read reports of contact protocols, of how to engage or observe unknown life forms, but none of that mattered now. Instinct replaced training. He shifted the rifle, lining up the nearest target. His finger hovered over the trigger. A burst of static filled his earpiece, sharp enough to make him flinch. Specter 1, status? They're on the ground, he whispered. 12, maybe more. Moving in formation. Not human. No visible insignia. Weapons unknown. Copy, the voice said, brittle with tension. Do not engage. Hold observation until... The transmission cut off. He tapped the comm again. Watchtower, repeat. Do you copy? Nothing but static. The line was dead. He looked back through the scope. The creatures were spreading out, moving with unnatural coordination. They scanned the terrain with instruments that emitted beams of pale blue light. One of them paused and turned its head toward his ridge. Harlow froze. The light swept across the tree line, cutting through leaves and branches. When it passed over him, the temperature around his body spiked, and, for a fraction of a second, he felt completely exposed. The beam moved on. He waited, 10 seconds. 20. When he was certain they hadn't seen him, he exhaled slowly. His hand trembled once before steadying again. He watched as one of the beings knelt beside a crater where their pod had landed. Its hands moved with precision, planting small metallic spires into the ground. They pulsed once and then vanished beneath the soil. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't reconnaissance. It was construction. He shifted the scope slightly, marking positions, counting units. 12 had become 20. Beyond them, more pods were opening. The air shimmered with heat and energy, distorting the jungle into surreal shapes. He felt the hair on his arms rise. He needed to move. Observation meant nothing if he died here, but leaving would mean losing sight of what they were doing. He hesitated, caught between survival and duty. Then one of the creatures released a drone, small, spherical, and silent. It hovered above the ground, scanning with that same piercing light. The others followed suit, sending the machines out in every direction. Harlow knew then that hiding was no longer an option. The drone's light would find him sooner or later. He reached into the pocket of his vest, pulling free a small EMP grenade. He hadn't planned to use it, but plans rarely survive contact with the unknown. He pulled the pin and waited. The drone's hum grew louder. When it floated within range, he tossed the device, rolling onto his back. The explosion was silent, a pulse that rippled through the air like a ripple through water. The drone dropped instantly, its lights extinguished. The aliens turned as one. Harlow didn't hesitate. He fired. The round tore through the nearest figure's skull, scattering shards of luminous fluid. The body fell, its glow flickering out. The others reacted instantly, energy weapons flaring to life. The jungle ignited around him, trees bursting into flame as plasma bolts cut through the air. He rolled down the ridge, using the slope to gain speed, his rifle slung across his back. When he hit the ground, he crawled behind a tree trunk thick enough to offer cover. The bark sizzled above his head as bolts struck, vaporizing chunks of wood. He returned fire, 2 controlled shots. One found its mark, another didn't. He shifted again, moving low and fast, weaving between the shadows. The forest burned behind him, each explosion lighting the night like lightning. Minutes blurred together. He didn't know how many he'd hit, only that the shooting had stopped. Smoke hung in the air, thick and acrid. He waited, counting heartbeats, until silence returned. He climbed to a crouch and scanned the clearing. The aliens were gone. Their dead glowed faintly, staining the ground with iridescent blood. Above, the clouds churned with red light. Harlow pressed his hand to the comm switch. Watchtower, this is Specter 1. Multiple hostiles confirmed. Engaged under duress. Possible enemy withdrawal. Static. He looked up at the sky again. More streaks were descending, dozens, maybe hundreds. He tightened his grip on the rifle. They're not withdrawing, he murmured. The jungle around him went dark again, but the stars were still falling. The jungle stank of ozone and death. Smoke hung low, curling through the trees like a ghost reluctant to leave. Harlow crouched beside the carcass of one of the aliens, studying the corpse with detached precision. Its exoskeletal armor was still warm, the strange bioluminescent veins pulsing faintly before dimming to black. Beneath the translucent plating, its muscles were bundles of fiber and light. The weapon it had carried was fused into its hand, almost organic. He tapped it with his knife. It vibrated softly, like something still alive. He stepped back. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in this world, and now it was bleeding into his soil. He scanned the area again, his instincts crawling. The air was too still. No birds, no insects. Only the slow drip of condensed water falling from leaves. He knew that quiet. It was the kind that meant he wasn't alone. He slid into the undergrowth, silent as mist, his ghillie suit blending into the moss and shadows. Every movement was a calculation, every pause deliberate. 100 meters to the east, faint movement, a flash of blue light, low and cautious. Another patrol. He'd expected that. They wouldn't leave their dead unaccounted for. He counted at least 8 silhouettes moving through the ferns, scanning with those glowing orbs they called eyes. Drones hovered above them, emitting faint hums as they combed the area with invisible beams. They'd learned from the first encounter. He needed to move before they triangulated. The first rule of survival: never be where they expect you. He crawled along a ridge, slow, unhurried. The earth was soft from rain, sucking at his elbows and knees. His heart beat slow, and even snipers didn't rush. They adapted. He reached higher ground and slid behind a fallen trunk. Through the scope, he tracked their advance. They were methodical, sweeping in lines, each step measured. He recognized that rhythm. It was military, just not human. For a moment, he admired the efficiency of their formation. Then he reminded himself admiration was a luxury. He watched one break formation, scanning toward his old position. He adjusted the scope a fraction and squeezed the trigger. The alien collapsed before the report reached its comrades. The others turned instantly, plasma bolts slicing through the trees where he'd been minutes ago. Bark exploded into embers. He smiled faintly. They were learning, but so was he. He began to circle wide, using the noise of their fire to mask his movement. A sniper's best ally was chaos. He made it his weapon. When he reached the far edge of the clearing, he paused beside a shallow stream. He dipped his hands in the water, then smeared mud across his face and gloves, dampening his thermal trace. He lay prone beside the stream, rifle poised. Through his scope, he watched the aliens regroup. Their voices were a series of mechanical clicks, rhythmic but agitated. For the first time, he sensed uncertainty among them. He took another shot. Another body fell. He shifted his position. Another. Within 5 minutes, the jungle had gone quiet again. The few remaining creatures vanished into the brush, retreating toward their pods. He exhaled slowly, adjusting the comm switch on his shoulder. Watchtower, this is Specter. Patrol eliminated. Confirm signal relay, over. Silence. Only static. He tried again. Nothing. The signal wasn't just weak, it was gone. They jammed it. He sat back against a tree, weighing his options. The mission protocol was simple. Hold observation, report movements, avoid engagement. That protocol was irrelevant now. He was cut off, surrounded, and the enemy was adapting. He needed information, and he needed it fast. He stripped the comms unit from one of the alien corpses, examining its crystalline surface. The design was incomprehensible, but it pulsed with faint energy. He tapped it with the butt of his knife. The surface rippled, displaying ghostly symbols in the air, lines of alien script shifting and rearranging. A holographic projection flickered, showing a grid of Earth's surface. Dots blinked across continents. Hundreds of them. It wasn't an invasion. It was an occupation. Harlow's jaw tightened. He closed the projection, pocketing the device. It wasn't enough to survive anymore. He needed to disrupt whatever they were doing. A faint metallic click sounded nearby. He froze. The noise repeated, measured, deliberate, not random. He lowered himself to the ground, crawling under a tangle of roots. Through the gaps, he saw movement, a figure smaller than the others, moving alone. The armor was different, sleeker, thinner. A scout. It carried a scanning tool that projected waves of light across the terrain. The light passed within inches of Harlow's face, but didn't register. His thermal masking held. When the scout turned, he moved. Quick, silent. One arm looped around the alien's neck. The other pressed his knife beneath its shin. The creature struggled, then stilled. Its eyes flickered once, twice, then dimmed. He eased it to the ground, retrieving the scanner. It was warm in his hands, humming softly. He pressed the side, and symbols rearranged into a faint holographic map of the jungle. His position glowed as a red dot. Around it, dozens of blue ones moved in steady patterns. They were closing in. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, streaking mud across his temple. "You're getting predictable," he muttered. He used the scanner to lead them into a trap. He placed sound beacons, small metal scraps rigged to echo gunfire, around the perimeter of a nearby ravine. Then he positioned himself on the opposite ridge. Minutes later, the aliens descended into the ravine, drawn by the false gunfire. Their sensors swept the wrong direction. He waited until they clustered, then fired into a fuel cell on one of their drones. The explosion rolled through the valley, tearing through the group in a burst of white flame. Leaves rained down like ash. When the smoke cleared, only 2 figures crawled from the wreckage. He didn't waste bullets. One fell to the forest floor without a sound. The other fired wildly, its plasma bolts cutting lines of fire through the brush before a single shot silenced it. Harlow watched the flames die. The night swallowed the light again, leaving only the faint glow of alien blood seeping into the soil. He leaned against a tree, exhaustion creeping into his limbs. His shoulder ached from the recoil. His fingers trembled slightly. He forced them still. There was no room for fatigue. Not yet. He thought briefly of home, of the dry Arizona air, the smell of sand and diesel from the base, the weight of silence before dawn. It felt like another life. Out here, he wasn't a man. He was a function, a necessity. He looked at the alien scanner again. The red dot pulsed brighter now, as though aware of him. For the first time, he wondered if they were learning more about him than he was about them. A low hum filled the air. He looked up. High above, something vast passed over the canopy, blotting out the moonlight. Its underside shimmered with thousands of lights. Too slow for an aircraft, too silent for a drone. It wasn't a ship. It was something else, something alive. He dropped into the mud, flattening his body. The air vibrated with low-frequency sound, like the rumble of a heart too large to belong to anything natural. The scanner blinked rapidly. The blue dots began moving faster. He didn't understand what they were doing until it was too late. The ground beneath him trembled, and from the earth itself rose metallic roots, spires of black metal twisting upward, pulsing with energy. The pods weren't just transports. They were seeding the ground. He watched, horrified but calculating. This was no longer reconnaissance. This was terraforming. He backed away slowly, keeping low, and spoke into his dead comms anyway. Watchtower, this is Specter. The enemy's building something. Coordinates following. Static. He lowered the mic, then, I'll do it myself. He looked at the scanner again, at the growing web of blue lights converging. The odds didn't matter. They never had. He shouldered his rifle, eyes narrowing toward the rising light. The jungle shadows swallowed him whole. The hunt was about to begin again. The night pressed down like a living weight, thick with smoke and static. Harlow moved through it like a shadow stitched from the dark, every step a quiet assertion of control against the chaos building around him. The jungle no longer smelled of earth and rain. It reeked of metal and scorched foliage. The alien roots had spread, thin tendrils glimmering faintly as they burrowed deeper into the ground. He could hear them hum beneath his boots, alive with energy. Whatever they were growing, it was accelerating. He paused beside a stream, knelt, and let the cold water wash the grime from his hands. In the reflection, his face was almost unrecognizable. Streaks of mud and soot framing eyes, too sharp, too hollow. He wondered how many hours it had been since the first drop pod fell. The sun hadn't risen once. The clouds above were dense, charged with the shimmer of alien interference. It could have been 6 hours. It could have been 60. Time meant nothing now. He rechecked his rifle, fingers moving with mechanical precision. The barrel was clean, the bolt smooth, the scope clear. Each movement steadied him. Routine was survival. But his thoughts kept circling back to the scanner he'd stolen. The red that representing him now pulsed faster, brighter, as if marking him for something unseen. He considered smashing it, but curiosity held him. If they were tracking him, then he could use it. The air vibrated, faint at first, then building, a rhythm like distant thunder. He dropped to a crouch and lifted his rifle. Through the scope, he saw figures moving between the trees, dozens of them. But these weren't scouts or patrols. They were soldiers. He could see the heavy plating on their limbs, the elongated rifles glowing with heat, and behind them, a towering form cloaked in distortion. A commander, maybe. He'd fought insurgents, warlords, and machines, but never something that radiated intelligence, so alien. They were hunting him now, not as prey, but as an obstacle to a race. He scanned for an advantage. The terrain was sloped with shallow valleys and ridges. He spotted a fallen tree across the ravine, its trunk hollowed by age. Perfect cover. He sprinted low, movements controlled, sliding into position just as the first volley of plasma burned through the air. The ground erupted behind him, splattering molten dirt. He steadied his breathing, lined up a shot, and fired. One alien dropped, its armor cracking open in a spray of light. Another turned toward the flash. Harlow shifted, fired again. 2 down, but there were too many. They spread in a crescent, pushing forward in silence. He felt the old rhythm return, the razor-edge focus that came when instinct replaced fear. His world contracted to the rifle, the crosshair, the breath before the trigger broke. Every shot was measured, deliberate, an act of defiance against inevitability. But the aliens weren't mindless. They adapted, using cover, coordinating through bursts of static and frequencies his headset couldn't block. He shifted positions, crawling up the ridge while reloading. The scanner at his belt blinked again. He pulled it out briefly. New dots appeared in the periphery. They were flanking him. He cursed under his breath and moved faster, angling toward higher ground. The canopy thinned here, revealing the sky, a shifting mass of gray cloud and pale light from the enormous vessel still hovering above. It looked like a wound in the heavens, leaking its poison into Earth's atmosphere. He found a narrow plateau, positioned the rifle, and opened fire. One by one, the flanking units fell, their bodies crashing into the underbrush. But with each kill, more light ignited below, fresh arrivals from the pods. He could feel the jungle dying beneath the invasion, the heat wilting leaves, the soil blackening. Something hissed behind him. He spun, knife in hand, and barely ducked as a plasma bolt shredded a tree trunk beside his head. A soldier had crept up the ridge, larger than the others, armor humming with power. Harlow lunged forward, slashing low. The blade struck a gap between plates, releasing a burst of luminous fluid. The alien swung back, catching Harlow's shoulder. Pain flared hot and sharp, but he didn't falter. He shoved the knife upward, driving it deep beneath the creature's jaw until the body convulsed and stilled. He staggered back, panting, his arm slick with blood. The wound burned, but the pain kept him awake. He tore a strip from his sleeve and bound it tight, teeth clenched. The scanner blinked again. Now it wasn't just tracking positions. It was transmitting. He realized too late what that meant. A distant roar split the air. From above, streaks of light descended, precise and devastating. Orbital bombardment. The aliens were purging the area, burning away everything. He dove for cover as the first blast hit, the shock wave hurling him against the ground. Heat seared his lungs. When the world steadied, he opened his eyes to find the jungle transformed into a wasteland of glowing ash. The roots still pulsed, deeper now, their light diffused through the charred soil. The bombardment hadn't destroyed them. It had fed them. He dragged himself upright, coughing through the smoke. His comm crackled weakly. "Specter, come and repeat." Evac window closing. He froze. "Watchtower, I read you. What's your position?" Static, then a strained voice. "Command gone dark. We're consolidating survivors near coastal sectors. If you're still out there, mark yourself for retrieval." He looked at the scanner. The red dot blinked like a beacon of death. "Negative," he said quietly. "Can't risk it. The signal draws them." A pause, then the voice softened. "You can't fight them alone, Sergeant." Harlow glanced around the smoking ruins. "I already am." The line died. He looked toward the roots again. They were converging now, the jungle floor splitting as a metallic bloom unfolded from the earth, petals of steel forming a structure, glowing from within. It was vast, pulsing with power. He aimed his scope at its core and saw what looked like a generator, shielded by a lattice of energy. He could end it here, or at least wound it. He adjusted his scope, compensating for heat distortion and wind. His finger found the trigger. He whispered to himself, "For Earth." The shot cracked through the silence. It hit the shield and rebounded in a flash of white light. The blast threw him backward, tearing his ears with the concussion. His vision swam, ringing, filling the void where sound should be. When it cleared, the structure still stood, untouched. He pushed himself up, dizzy, and saw movement in the haze. The towering figure he'd glimpsed before emerged, taller than the rest, armor rippling with liquid metal. Its eyes burned like twin suns. It stopped a few meters away, studying him. Then, in a voice like static shaped into words, it spoke. Human. Persistence unnecessary. Harlow lifted his rifle, blood dripping from his arm. Get used to it, he said, and fired. The bullet hit its chest and flattened uselessly. The alien didn't flinch. Instead, it raised one clawed hand. The air vibrated, and Harlow felt himself lifted off the ground, gravity twisting. He gasped, vision darkening. Then something in the distance exploded. The generator flared violently, struck from above. Human aircraft? Artillery? He couldn't tell. The alien staggered, dropping him. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and crawled behind debris. When he looked up again, the figure was gone, consumed by the flames. He coughed, tasting blood. Somewhere, far above, the sky cracked open with lightning. Reinforcements or destruction, it didn't matter. The battle wasn't over. He pressed a shaking hand to the scanner. The map flickered once, twice, and then a new signal appeared. Human, faint but alive. He smiled through the pain. Guess I'm not the only ghost left. He gathered his rifle, straightened his posture, and started walking toward the signal, each step cutting deeper into the glowing ruins. Behind him, the alien roots pulsed faster, feeding on the world. Ahead, something waited. He didn't know if it was salvation or another fight, but he went anyway, because the night still belonged to him. The storm began before dawn, though the sky never lightened. The clouds pulsed with a sickly blue glow, thunder rolling like the growl of some vast machine. Harlow trudged through the flooded jungle, his boots sinking into black mud that hissed faintly with heat. Every tree around him was dead or dying, their trunks wrapped in the metallic vines that had swallowed the forest. The scanner in his hand flickered, its display glitching between coordinates and static. Somewhere ahead, the faint human signal still blinked, a heartbeat in the chaos. He kept moving. Pain radiated from his shoulder where the alien had struck him. The wound had begun to throb with unnatural warmth. He ignored it. The air was poisoned now, heavy with the metallic tang of ozone. His mask's filters clicked with each breath. He was tired, more than tired, but fatigue had become just another sound in the noise of survival. The signal grew stronger as he climbed a ridge overlooking what used to be a river basin. Now it was a crater, vast and glowing. At its center rose the alien structure, no longer just a seed, but a tower. It reached into the clouds, pulsing rhythmically, sending waves of energy across the horizon. The jungle around it was gone, replaced by a landscape of glass and metal veins. And at the base of that impossible tower, small flashes of movement. Human movement. Harlow lowered himself into a prone position, raised his scope, and adjusted the magnification. 3 figures. One waved a flare, its red light a defiant ember against the alien glow. He recognized the movement pattern immediately, trained, deliberate. Soldiers. Survivors. He activated his comm again, though the static nearly drowned his voice. This is Specter to ground team. Confirm position. A crackle, then a voice, rough but alive. Specter? Holy hell, you're real. We thought everyone in Delta was gone. Not yet, he said. What's your situation? Cut off and running out of time. That tower's building something. We're trying to overload its core, but we can't get close enough to plant charges. Too much interference. Harlow watched the flickering arcs of energy crawling up the tower's surface. Then we changed the odds. He slid down the ridge, moving through the ashen undergrowth until he reached their position. The soldiers were gaunt, faces smeared with grime and exhaustion. One saluted weakly, disbelief written across his features. Sir, we thought you were... Don't finish that, Harlow interrupted, his tone calm but final. Show me what you've got. They led him to a makeshift camp hidden beneath a shattered boulder. Inside were salvaged explosives, broken rifles, and a portable transmitter running on the last of its power cells. The younger soldier, a corporal named Reyes, showed him a schematic on a cracked tablet. We managed to map part of the structure. The core's deep inside, shielded, but the energy conduits along the outer shell are vulnerable. If we overload them in sequence, it should trigger a chain reaction. How much time would that buy us? Harlow asked. Reyes hesitated. Minutes, maybe, but if it goes right, the explosion will take the core with it. And if it doesn't, then we die fast. Harlow nodded once. Good enough. He studied the schematic, memorizing the layout. The plan was suicidal, but he'd stopped believing in survival hours ago. There was purpose here, and that was enough. You plant the charges along the west conduit. I'll take the eastern one. We detonate simultaneously on my mark. Reyes frowned. You'll never make it out in time. Not planning to. The corporal started to argue, but Harlow's look silenced him. Do your job, soldier, he said softly. They moved out under the storm. The rain came down in sheets, sizzling as it struck the alien metal. The tower's hum grew louder with every step, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. The air shimmered with distortion. The closer they got, the more gravity itself seemed to bend. Harlow crawled beneath one of the conduit arches, the heat radiating off it intense enough to blister skin. He set the charges carefully, each click echoing in the storm. His hands were steady. Around him, the earth pulsed like a heartbeat. Through his earpiece came Reyes's voice. Charges planted on our end. Awaiting your signal. Harlow finished arming the final detonator. Stand by. A flash of movement caught his eye, silver shapes emerging from the haze. Drones, dozens of them, descending like a swarm. Their eyes glowed with cold light, scanning for intruders. He dropped to one knee and took aim. The first shot shattered a drone midair, the second pierced another's core. Plasma bolts rained down, searing through the mud. He rolled aside, reloaded, and kept firing. The rifle was an extension of his will, each pull of the trigger a refusal to yield. Specter, they're closing in, Reyes shouted. I see them. Get ready to blow it on my command. A bolt grazed his arm, spinning him backward. He hit the ground hard, his rifle sliding from his grip. Pain roared through him, but he crawled forward, dragging himself toward the detonator. The drones swarmed closer, their light merging into a single blinding glow. He reached the device, pressed his thumb to the trigger pad, and whispered, now. The world erupted. The shock wave tore through the basin, hurling debris and flame into the sky. The tower shuddered, its light fracturing into 1,000 shards. Harlow was thrown into the mud, vision blurred, ears ringing. When he forced himself upright, the tower was collapsing in on itself, the conduits glowing red-hot as the chain reaction rippled upward. Reyes's voice came faintly through the static. We did it. Specter, it's... The transmission cut. The explosion reached the core, and a blinding sphere of light consumed the horizon. Harlow dropped, covering his head as the ground convulsed. Then silence. When he lifted his head again, the tower was gone. Only a crater remained, glowing faintly under the storm. The metallic vines were ash. The humming had stopped. He stood slowly, every muscle screaming. The rain fell cold now, real rain, washing the soot from his face. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air smelled clean. He looked for the others. The camp was gone, buried beneath debris. No movement, no voices, just the wind and the hiss of cooling metal. He should have felt victorious, but there was no triumph here, only quiet and the weight of what it cost. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and began to walk. Each step echoed in the empty basin. Above, the clouds began to thin, revealing a sliver of dawn. The light was weak, but it was enough. His comm crackled faintly. Specter, this is Watchtower Command. Do you copy? He froze, unsure if it was real. Specter, we're receiving data from your location. The signal interference is clearing. You did it. He smiled faintly, voice rasping. Didn't do it alone. Extraction en route. Hold position. He glanced around the ruined landscape, at the steam rising from the shattered ground. Negative, he said. There's still something out here. You'll need coordinates. Sergeant, we can't risk. Not asking. He switched off the comm. He climbed the far ridge overlooking the crater, the first rays of sunlight glinting off his rifle. Behind him, Earth breathed again. Ahead, the sky still shimmered faintly with alien movement, retreating ships or reinforcements. It didn't matter. He knelt, sighted through his scope at the fading stars, and murmured, "You came for our world at night." He chambered round, steady and unyielding. "But the night belongs to me." The breeze stirred his ghillie cloak as he vanished into the lightning jungle, one last ghost in a world reborn.